Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your sources, unpack complex ideas, and really pull out those important nuggets of knowledge for you. Our whole mission is simple. Give you a shortcut to being well-informed, maybe find some surprising facts, add just enough humor, to keep you hooked. Today, we're jumping into, well, a really fascinating ancient text. It speaks volumes about something we all wrestle with, misplaced trust.
Yeah.
We're looking at excerpts from MCS Jeremiah chapter 2.
Yeah, and what's so striking here is how Jeremiah's very first prophecy, the one he delivers to Jerusalem, it just lays bare this pattern of human behavior. It honestly repeats across millennia. We'll be digging into what happens when people turn their backs on, well, the essential source and trade what's truly valuable for things they make themselves.
Right, and it's easy to hear that and think, oh, I'd never do that.
Yeah.
But I think as we unpack this, we'll see just how easy it is to start trusting in, our own efforts or our bank accounts, maybe other systems instead
With
of
the real foundation.
Exactly, instead of that foundational source. So what does all this ancient history mean for us today? Let's dive in. Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. Jeremiah is sent to Jerusalem, and the message feels, well, powerful, but also kind of heartbreaking.
It really does. The word of Adonai, that's the Hebrew name for God, often Lord, it comes right to Jeremiah, and the very first thing God brings up isn't their current mess, but their early devotion. He remembers their love like a young bride, how they followed him through the desert, described as a land not sown.
Yeah, that wasn't just a walk in the park, was it? This was barren land.
Yeah.
Inhospitable. And the source makes such a good point. God took them from this life of constant toil, working day and night just for food, to a place where they could just pick and eat. It's a total shift.
Exactly. It's a really powerful picture of radical provision and trust. It reminds us that tree sustenance isn't always earned through endless work. Sometimes it's received, like a gift. That early period was all about learning to rely completely on divine care when faced with, well, nothing else.
Okay, then we hit Jeremiah 2.3, and Israel's called first fruits. What's the deeper meaning there? It sounds like more than just an offering.
Oh, first fruits, yeah. It's more than just giving the first bit of the crop in worship. In ancient Israel, this was a radical act of faith. I mean, imagine giving away the best part of your harvest.
Before you even know if the rest will come in.
Precisely. It was this almost anti-anxiety practice, a real challenge to the whole idea of self-sufficiency. God's reminding them, when you were set apart from me, when you operated in that radical trust, anyone who messed with you faced judgment. It spoke to their unique protected status.
And then verse 4 brings in the house of Jacob and all families in the house of Israel. So who exactly is that referring to?
Right, so that's basically the descendants of Jacob, the 12 tribes that made up the nation of Israel. These families were chosen, kind of set apart to introduce the world to the one true God. And that number 12, it pops up all over the Bible, doesn't it? Often linked with divine authority, a sort of complete foundational representation.
Okay, so that's the backstory, this glorious past, total loyalty, unique provision. But then the story takes this sharp turn, almost unbelievable. Moving into Jeremiah 2.5, God asks this question that just cuts right to the bone. What did your ancestors find wrong with me, he asks, to make them go so far away, to make them go after nothings and become themselves nothings?
Yeah, it's rhetorical, obviously. It's meant to just highlight how absurd their actions were. The source makes that simple, devastating point. There was no fault with God. He'd been faithful, providing, protecting everything. Yet they turned away.
And verse 6 digs into that turning away. They didn't even ask, where is Adonai, who brought us out of Egypt, who led us through the desert? Sounds like it wasn't a sudden thing, more like a slow drift, right?
Exactly. The source points that out. When times were really tough, like escaping Egypt or crossing the desert, they had to cling to God. There was no choice. But as time passed, and maybe that crucial history wasn't intentionally passed down, wasn't taught to the kids, they started to feel self-sufficient. Yeah. Then, when tough times inevitably came back around, instead of remembering how God delivered them before, they turned to other things. Man-made things, idols, for comfort and security.
Wow, so the modern parallel is right there. Lots of us do the same thing. We forget past deliverance, maybe past struggles we got through, and we start trusting our own smarts, our savings.
Or temporary political fixes, yeah.
Right.
And the text really hammers home this lesson. During the good times, the easy times, that's precisely when we need to remember and talk about God's past faithfulness. It's not just nostalgia.
Yeah.
It's actually vital preparation for future trials. And a big part of that, remembering, the source suggests, is sharing our stories, personal ones, collective ones, of divine intervention.
And then comes that tragic punchline in verse 7. God says he brought them into this fertile land full of abundance, but what do? They defiled my land and made my heritage loathsome.
They completely forgot who their ultimate provider was, took all his gifts for granted, and, kind of shockingly, used that very abundance. He gave them as a platform to worship things they made with their own hands. It's a really stark reminder God wants to provide richly, not just get us through hardship, but it's so easy to betray that provision.
But it wasn't just individuals forgetting, was it? Verse 8 paints this picture of like total systemic collapse, the pillars of society just crumbling. Priests didn't seek God. The Torah dealers, the ones teaching God's law, didn't really know. Him, the shepherds, their leaders and kings, rebelled. Even the prophets started prophesying by Baal.
Yeah, Baal, that powerful Canaanite storm god, a major rival deity. It shows this complete bankruptcy. Religious systems, political, even commercial ones, it just evolved into everyone for themselves, spiritually speaking. And what's fascinating there is thinking about, well, does this sound familiar today? The way trust in institutions and leaders can just erode.
It definitely resonates. And then God makes this really serious statement in verse 9. So again, I state my case against you. And state it against your grandchildren, too. That phrase, against your grandchildren, wow, that sounds heavy.
It is heavy. Because they'd forgotten and turned to idols, God held them accountable. But the idea about children's children, it isn't really about blaming innocent kids. It's more of a tragic recognition that the adults had failed. They didn't teach their children, so how could they teach their children? This spiritual amnesia, God saw it lasting for 3 generations. It's just a sobering look at the generational impact of neglect.
It makes you think about any culture today where maybe kids get, I don't know, a superficial dose of knowledge on a Sunday.
Right.
But there's no real training, no living example the rest of the week. How can they possibly teach their own kids what they haven't truly absorbed themselves? Okay, then comes this almost incredulous challenge in verses 10 through 12. God basically says, go look around, ask other nations. Has anyone ever done something this foolish? He tells them, cross to the coast of the Kidium, that's like Cyprus, right? And look, send to Kedar, out in the Arabian desert, and observe closely. Has a nation ever exchanged its gods?
Yeah, he's telling them, check from west to east, the whole known world. And the point is, no other nation, no matter how off-base their beliefs were, had ever just swapped out their gods for worthless ones. But Israel, who had known the one true God. They traded his presence, their glory, the text calls it, for these empty, powerless idols they'd made up. The text says all of heaven literally shudders in horror at how ridiculous this exchange is.
Be aghast at this, you heavens. Shudder in absolute horror, says Adonai. That language is so visceral.
It really is. And yet, the source points out the same kind of thing is happening more and more today. Maybe we don't have literal statues, but we exchange, the pursuit of deep genuine meaning for endless stuff or fleeting trends or just constant distraction. It forces us to ask, doesn't it? We need to stop and really think about the things we chase. What is this really worth in the long run?
And verse 13, it highlights what God calls 2 evils. He says, they have abandoned me, the fountain of living water, and dug themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. That metaphor is just so potent.
Oh, absolutely. This is core. It's not just that they rejected the source, the continuous, maintenance-free, life-giving fountain of living water that God represented. They foolishly replaced him with their own creations. Cisterns, things that are man-made, need constant upkeep, and crucially here, are broken. They leak. They can't hold water.
So it's not just bad trust, it's a terrible trade.
A terrible trade, exactly. A spring is constant, natural. A cistern is work, and it breaks. And we face that same choice constantly, don't we? Drink from the natural, abundant spring or keep trying to dig our own leaky cisterns.
So what's the inevitable fallout from this catastrophic exchange for Israel? Verse 14 asks, is Israel a slave born into serfdom? If not, why has he become plundered?
Right. God's basically holding up a mirror. He's asking them to compare what they were, this uniquely chosen, divinely protected nation, to what they've sadly become. Vulnerable, plundered, essentially like slaves. That first step towards any real change, any repentance, is always realizing exactly where you are and how your own choices got you there.
And their land reflects this, right? Desolate, ravaged by young lions in verses 15 to 17. And it says bluntly, haven't you brought this on yourself by abandoning Adonai, your God?
Yes, and he points out their ultimate shame. Their enemies have even shaved the crown of their heads, which was a sign of extreme humiliation in that culture. Their land is empty, barren. Why? Because they turn their backs on the Lord. It's presented as the direct, natural consequence of abandoning the source of life.
And they even tried turning elsewhere for help, didn't they? Verse 18 mentions looking to powerful nations like Egypt or Assyria ashore.
Yeah, it's this desperate scramble for external solutions to what are fundamentally internal spiritual problems. God essentially asks, why would you turn to these powerful but ultimately limited human empires for your needs?
When the Creator's right there.
Exactly, when the creator of everything, the one who sustained them in the desert, could provide so much more reliably. It's a huge reminder for us too, I think. All true strength, all real provision comes from that higher source. Relying on other people or systems alone, it's bound to disappoint eventually.
Then Jeremiah 2.19 hits them with this blunt, almost harsh message. Your own wickedness will correct you, your own backslidings will convict you. You will know and see how bad and bitter it was to abandon Adonai, your God.
God's basically saying, look around, observe your situation, realize that your current miserable state is a direct result of turning away from me. And the same principle applies to us, doesn't it? If we find ourselves stuck in some persistent mess, the text urges us, search your heart. Where might we have strayed from our core principles? Consequences often follow choices, even if we eventually seek forgiveness.
It even uses the language of prostituting themselves in verse 20. And this is after God broke their yoke, snapped their chains, set them free.
Right. They might have said the words, I won't sin, but then their actions showed otherwise. They worshipped any fleeting desire, any worldly pursuit symbolized by worshiping under every green tree, instead of coming to the designated place Jerusalem as commanded. It shows that the best act of worship isn't just talk, it's consistent obedience, consistent alignment. When we chase worldly things instead of listening to that deeper guidance, we essentially cheapen ourselves, just like the text says.
And that beautiful image in verse 21, I planted you as a choice vine. How did you degenerate into a wild vine for me?
A planted vine, one that's cultivated and cared for, yields predictable good fruit. But a wild vine, left to itself, corrupted by every passing influence, like the wind blowing seeds around, it produces uncertain fruit, often sour, unusable. It's such a powerful metaphor for potential, isn't it? Stay close to the source, stay cultivated, and the fruit is good. Try to do it all on your own, go wild, and the result can be corrupted, disappointing.
And the sense of guilt is just pervasive. It feels hopeless when God says in verse 22, even if you scrub yourself with soda and plenty of soap, the stain of your guilt is still there before me.
Yeah, that really drives home the human predicament, doesn't it? Before a true, profound cleansing is offered, we simply couldn't remove the stain, the memory, the impact of our own straying from a divine perspective. No amount of scrubbing, no amount of self-effort or superficial cleaning could reach that deep.
And then comes that really stark comparison in verses 23 and 24, comparing them to a restive young female camel running wildly, uncontrollably in heat. That's quite an image.
It is. It's shocking almost. God compares their frantic, uncontrolled idolatry to this unchecked, almost compulsive biological drive. It's a powerful metaphor for how irrational and out of control their pursuit of false gods had become. It really speaks to that constant inner battle Paul talked about in Romans, the flesh versus the spirit, the pull towards immediate gratification versus true, lasting value.
And finally, in verse 25, God pleads, stop. Stop before your shoes wear out, your throat is dry from thirst. But what's their reply? No, it's hopeless. I love these strangers, and I'm going after them.
It's this moment of profound divine pleading. Resist. Don't go down that destructive path. But they just give in. They say it's hopeless, essentially admitting defeat to their own desires, which leads inevitably to disgrace when it all comes out. It speaks volumes about our human capacity for stubbornness, even when the consequences are staring us in the face. We face that kind of choice daily, right? Between what we know is right and what our impulses are screaming for.
So the shame then falls on everyone, doesn't it? Verses 26 and 27 mention kings, leaders, priests, prophets. They're saying to a piece of wood, you're my father, and to a stone, you gave birth to us. They've turned their backs on God, but then when trouble comes, they will plead, rouse yourself and save us.
Exactly. They totally forgot their true origin, their creator. They only remember to ask for help when they're in deep trouble. It sounds harsh, but many people today operate similarly, don't they? You might ignore profound truths, spiritual connections most of the time, and only really engage when there's illness or some major crisis. But the text implies that a real relationship is constant, not just for emergencies. Anything less, the source suggests, is basically a form of idolatry, putting something else in God's place.
And verses 28 and 29 really hammer home the futility of that. God asks, where are your gods that you made for yourselves? Let them rouse themselves if they can save you when trouble comes.
Right. Their actions had separated them from their true source, yet they often ended up blaming God for abandoning them. But the reality was, they left God. And again, many of us do the same. We trust our own plans, our own strength, until it all falls apart. Then we might get angry or blame external forces or even God. What's fascinating, though, is that God often allows the consequences of rebellion to play out, not necessarily as punishment, but maybe in the hope that the fallout itself will lead to genuine turning back to repentance.
And God's response in verse 30 is so poignant. In vain have I struck down your people. They would not receive correction. Your own sword has devoured your prophets.
He sent messengers, he allowed difficulties, troubles, but they just refused to listen. They wouldn't humble themselves. It's a timeless pattern, really.
Yeah.
We see the same principle today. Often the challenges we face, the strikes, are meant to redirect us, to bring us back to what truly matters. It's presented as discipline born out of love, not anger, a desire for our ultimate well-being.
Then those almost bewildered questions in verse 31. Have I been a desert to Israel, or a land of oppressive darkness? Why do my people say, we're free to roam, we will no longer come to you?
God's trying to get them to see how completely ridiculous it is, to turn away from his consistent provision, which is not a desert, not darkness towards these empty, false promises. And honestly, if we just stopped and truly reflected on everything the foundational source of life has done, has provided, we'd see how utterly foolish it is to chase after fleeting, worldly things that can never truly satisfy.
And that analogy in verse 32 is so beautiful and sad. Does a girl forget her jewelry, or a bride her wedding sash? Yet my people have forgotten me, days beyond numbering.
A young woman, a bride, they care deeply about how they present themselves, about those symbols of value and commitment. But God's bride, his people, they had completely stopped caring about how they presented themselves to him. They'd forgotten what was most precious, most defining. And that's incredibly relevant today, isn't it? Many people might want the benefits of, say, salvation or a connection to something divine, but without really living in alignment with it. It highlights that gap between just saying you believe something and actually living it out.
Then verses 33 to 35 have this really strong accusation. You are so clever in your search for love, meaning idolatry, that the worst of women can learn from you. And then chillingly, right there on your clothing, is the blood of the innocent poor.
Whoa. Yeah. God compares their spiritual infidelity to the lowest forms and then pivots to this damning accusation of social injustice, neglecting the poor, the vulnerable. But what's absolutely crucial here, the text implies, isn't just the sin itself, it's the denial of the sin. They insisted, I haven't sinned, despite the obvious evidence like blood on their clothes. It's a powerful reminder that genuine restoration, true forgiveness, always starts with honest confession, not clever dodging.
And the final warning in verses 36 and 37 feels like the culmination of everything. You cheapen yourself when you change course so often you will be disappointed by Egypt too, just as you were disappointed by Ashur-Assyria. For Adonai rejects those in whom you trust. From them you will gain nothing.
Right. God's people just kept bouncing from one powerful nation to another, looking for security, for help, instead of trusting the one true source of all power and security. God lays it out plainly. Any trust placed in anyone or anything but him is fundamentally misplaced. It's a universal principle, really. Our hope for deep, lasting fulfillment, if we place it solely in other people or shifting trends or human systems, it will ultimately lead to disappointment. It leaves us empty-handed.
So we've really dug deep into Jeremiah chapter 2 here, explored God's incredibly profound message about, well, misplaced trust. We've seen how Israel turning away from their divine provider, relying instead on their own creations, their own political maneuvering, how it led straight to shame and desolation.
And connecting that to the big picture, the lessons for us today are just crystal clear, aren't they? The text is constantly prompting us, asking us to reflect. Where do we genuinely place our trust? Is it really in our own limited efforts, in material things that ultimately can't sustain us? Or is it in the one who is described as that fountain of living water?
Yeah, the consequences of misplaced trust, they're real. They were then, they are now. But the underlying message, the profound message, seems to be that God, in this relentless love, still seeks to discipline us, to draw us back, not out of anger, but out of this deep desire for us to experience his full, flowing provision and the true freedom that's only found when we're aligned with that fundamental source.
Which really brings up a challenging question for all of us listening, I think. What subtle broken cisterns might you be unknowingly digging in your own life right now? You know, those things you rely on that just can't hold water. And maybe more importantly, what would it actually look like day to day to consciously turn back towards that fountain of living water instead?
That's definitely something powerful to mull over. We hope this deep dive has given you some real insights. Thanks so much for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.